Yeah, it was amazing.
Hey, Katie, just FYI, right at 1 o'clock, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I got a county parks meeting that starts at 1, so I got to jump off like a minute before. Just to let you know.
No
Sounds
problem.
great.
Katie, I'm going to share my screen and get the presentation part up and going. Mhm. Simon, I realize I should have sent you the Beach Ranger meeting notes before this meeting instead of waiting till the next one. So I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's right. I think I've got a gist of what kind of the other beach rangers were thinking, and hopefully, that'll be talked about more next meeting instead of this one's, but we'll see.
Really.
Yep. No worries.
You all do a quick check for me and make sure that the Q&A works. Someone could type in a test question. Thanks, Katie. Okay, so answering live is when we just discuss it, and then if there's a written answer, I can type it in. Got it.
Oh, you got to comment to the actual. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Zoom is tricky and has lots of different windows.
Mm-hmm.
It's always hard to learn and have the difference between Teams and Zoom changes all the time.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I feel like I need like a third and fourth computer screen to have all the Zoom tables and windows open so I know what's going on. And are we streaming right now as
Yes,
well?
we are streaming.
Cool.
Your screen though, you were sharing, but now you're sharing a different screen. There, now you're back.
Okay, we'll get started here shortly. We have a few more people in the waiting room coming on. And I'm sure as we get going, a couple more people might be jumping on as well. Just another minute. Elliot, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and change your name again on Zoom.
Am I not Elliot again?
Nope.
I can represent Daniela.
Okay, well, it's 11:01. Let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for attending the second OPRD Electric Assisted Bicycle Rules Advisory Committee. There we go. This is going to be a 2-hour long meeting. We're going to start off with just a quick recap of our first meeting, and then about 15 minutes for folks who had missed the first meeting to just introduce themselves to the rest of the group, ask any questions that they may have had. We'll go over our rules and goals for our meeting today, and then we'll jump right into looking at the current rules regarding e-assisted bicycles and some proposed changes that staff had talked about. None of these are set in stone, and they're all up for discussion today. So our goal is to have some respectful dialogue and see what kind of recommendations that this group can come up with. Also, happy Halloween for those that celebrate. I hope that getting out at 1 gives you plenty of time to finish last minute costumes and go for that candy run. Let's get started. This is our Rules Advisory Committee. We have a change from last time. I am going to apologize. I left off Ian Caldwell, who is also at OPRD and definitely a key person on our RAC, because Ian works with our ATV unit and is a wealth of knowledge of all the different ATV classifications, and has come up before in conversations past about people confusing e-assisted bicycles with e-motorized vehicles like motorcycles and dirt bikes, etc. So it'll be really great to have Ian's perspective on here. Ian, can I put you on the spot real quick to just say hello, maybe expand on that introduction just a little bit?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, Ian Caldwell, I'm based out of Central Oregon. I've worked with the ATV grant program for 21 years now. So I'm very familiar with the different uses. I work with all the different land managers throughout the state who manage OHV, ATVs and stuff. And there's a lot of like e-bikes on motorcycle trails and areas that are kind of next to each other. So I see a lot of those things. In my personal time, I actually have a one wheel, so that's like an electric assisted scooter. So I've researched all those laws to great details and stuff. And in Redmond, we have a dry canyon trail. So me and my wife, we ride that almost daily, and we see electric bikes all over the place, and just kind of the mixture of different uses. So
Thank you. And we also have a few folks who were unable to attend our meeting last time and had sent in some stand-ins or alternates, but they are here today. So if you missed the meeting last time, do you mind coming off mic and introducing yourself as well.
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Peter Swinton. I'm an urban planner with the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Peter.
And I'm Kim McCarroll. I'm with Oregon Equestrian Trails. So I'm tickled to be here too.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Sparker. I am a planner here at OPRD. Unable was to attend the first meeting, but I'm happy to be here for the second one.
Hi, Nicole.
I'm Skylar Archibald. I am Executive Director for the Sunset Empire Park and Rec District in Seaside, but also a member of ORTAC, the Oregon Regional Trails Advisory Commission, I think is what the C stands for. Someone correct me if that's wrong, but yeah.
We'll go with it, Skylar. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks.
Hey, I think that may have been everybody. Did I miss anyone? Okay, I'm just letting in a couple more folks from the waiting room and it's continue. Just reviewing our rules and goals that we talked about last meeting. We're going to have some respectful discussions and discourse. A lot of us here in this virtual room have very different experiences with e-bikes and other recreation at state parks and on the ocean shores. So we'll take in all of our different perspectives and consider the impacts and implementations of the new rules. The goal for this group is to come up with recommendations to the staff. It may not be all consensus based, and we may have differing opinions, and that is okay. They are all heard and noted. And then at the end of our fourth meeting, we will also have impact statements that the RAC is required to give input on for fiscal impacts, which relates to any sort of economic impacts for local businesses and equity impacts that we may see from this rule change. So with our rules and talking about rules, we are going to be respectful and understanding because this is a larger meeting with about 20 people in the room. Please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom to speak, and I will try to facilitate the best I can to call on you in that order. Mute your mic when you are not speaking. Let's try to stay on topic, but if you have something that does need to be brought up and is burning, let me know that you want to parking lot it, or you can put it into the chat, and we will have some time at the end of the meeting to go back to these topics. And then ask questions. You can use the Q&A feature. It is working to ask the questions. We'll stop periodically to address those questions or put them in the chat. We'll try to keep up with them. The chat, I think, is best used for that discussion and dialogue as it's going. So if you have questions that are relating outside of the chat, the Q&A feature is really helpful. And then, as I've stated before, we'll begin each meeting for about 15 minutes to allow for sharing for those who missed the previous meeting, or if there have been discussions from the first meeting or the previous meeting to bring up. And this is probably going to be more critical at the next meeting because we have some folks that weren't able to make today's meeting. So when we talk about the Ocean Shores rules in November, we'll have some more time to kind of recap this one. Moving into that, let's go into our recap. So we'll have about 15 minutes. We don't have to use all of that time, but is there anyone who has anything that they want to bring up or mention from the first meeting that they were not present for? It was a pretty basic sort of an administrative meeting, so I'm glad that there aren't any confusing questions. Is there anyone who was at the meeting that they have questions about process or timeline? So we'll just open this up for everybody at this point. Okay, we want to get to the rules. I don't see any hands. Okay. Well, let's move on then. That was a very quick 1 minute, 15-minute recap. Please bear with me while I juggle between all of the windows. Okay. It can be a little bit excruciating to do this line by line group edit. It is the best way for all of us to look at the same thing and have the discussions. So I've posted our current rules onto a Word document, and we will do the edit together. And we're going to start off with our Division 10 rule. So it's Chapter 736 in the Oregon Administrative Rules, Division 10, Section 15. And this is going to start off with our definitions. Now, before we jump into the actual editing, I do want to preface this by saying these Division 10 General Park Area rules are also under some proposed rule changes. By our February commission meeting, we are hoping that the commission will adopt changes. What those changes look like, we don't know for sure yet. We will have a public comment period coming up here shortly, but it does mean some of this will be impacted already. So if we have any conflicting changes, we will note that within our rules coordinators meetings, and we'll cover that. So it may look different from what you are seeing right now. I just want to make sure that that caveat is there. And again, you can follow that rulemaking on our website, and I'm happy to drop the link into the chat later if you're curious. But let's get into it. So in our general park area rules, we have our definitions, and I'm going to slowly scroll through and just read the words itself. And then when we get to the part where it will pertain to the assisted bike rules, I'll pause. So we have definitions for day use area, district manager, closed area, commission, dawn, department, director, domestic animals, dusk, enforcement officer, handler, and motorized vehicle. So this definition is going to be updated with our general park area rules, and it will match the Oregon Revised Statute in 801. So we can now look at other power-driven mobility device. And this one's pretty key to our rulemaking because by its current definition, it's not clear if it includes e-assisted bicycles or not. So the proposed change from staff right now is to add that clarification. So other power-driven mobility device means any mobility device powered by batteries, liquid fuel, or other engines, whether or not designed primarily for use by individuals with mobility disabilities, that is used by individuals with mobility disabilities for the purpose of locomotion, including golf cars, electronic personal assistance mobility devices, such as the Segway, or any mobility device designed to operate in areas without defined pedestrian routes, but that is not a wheelchair within the meaning defined in section 26 below, or an e-assisted bicycles as defined in section 27 below. So that gives you a little sneak peek into we are going to try to define e-assisted bicycles in this rule. And then to help with our discussion today too, we do have Helena. Maybe not. Helena Kesh is our ADA coordinator from OPRD, and I think she's going to jump on a little bit later, but if we have any specific ADA related questions for her, we can place those in the chat and ask them when she jumps on. Is there any discussion around other power-driven mobility devices, or do you want to see the rest of them and then we can kind of go back through?
I don't have any discussion pieces right now. This is Will Cortez, but I'd be willing to see all of them first before coming back to this one. I think this one is a key piece of this because I think the sticking point is that the ADA law says that OPDMDs can be anything around locomotion that wasn't originally intended as a mobility assistance device.
Thanks. Well, yeah, let's go through that. So the rest of our definitions are pretty generic for park property, park employee, park manager, park resource, peace officer, person, public, service animal. This is also going to be updated with the general park area rules, state park rules, state park website, violate visitor, wheelchair, and Will, just kind of going off of your last comment, this could also be something that we do look at as well. And then we look at adding electric assisted bicycle. And I apologize because some of these changes are in here and they're not showing up as tracked changes for some reason. But this part is all new, this 27 electric assisted bicycle. This would be the word for word definition as defined under the statute, the ORS 801-258, section 4, that is going to be updated January 1st of this year. Kim, you're asking a question right now. I'm going to answer this live. You're asking to get a copy of the rule. You can read it ahead of the meetings and make notes in the margins to help prepare. Yes, the current copy of the rules are already available on our website, like in our rules. I could have sent it out earlier. There were some staff changes to help this discussion along, and it is my fault. I did not finish them in time to get them in front of all of you early. So for the next ones, I definitely will. So thank you. And this definition that was passed with a House bill earlier this year includes the Class 1 electric assisted bicycle, which is an e-assisted bicycle that only provides assistance when the rider is pedaling, and it does not give additional assistance when you stop pedaling, and that the bicycle reaches the speed of 20 miles per hour. And then after that, it does not give you any further assistance. Class 2 e-bikes are propelled by its motor, and it does not require pedal assist. It has a throttle, and that also stops giving assistance once the bike reaches 20 miles per hour. Class 3 e-bikes are any e-bikes that are similar to Class 1, so they will be giving assist with pedal assist. And so if you stop pedaling, it stops giving you that motor assist, and also stops giving you that motor assist when that bicycle reaches 28 miles per hour. So you can continue to pedal, and if you can pedal fast enough and hard enough, you can go faster than 28 miles per hour. But the other caveat for our Class 3 bicycles is that it does have to have a speedometer. So those are the 3 recognized classes of e-bikes that the state has allowed. And there are some other updates to the revised statute as well that we will get into later. And then we continue with the rest of the definitions. We have also decided to add bicycle in as well, so that we can differentiate it from electric assisted bicycle up above. So those are the definitions that we have right now. And before we jump into the next section of rules, let's continue to have a discussion around definitions. And we can come back to the definitions too as we look at some of these other rules to see what it means. Ian, you have your hand up.
Yeah, we've kind of dealt with changing technology in the ATV world, especially side-by-sides, and we've had statute changes in our old admin rules. OARs, we had like defined what they are, and we switched to just referencing the actual statute. So because every time the statute changes, and we have to go back through rulemaking. So like, and because that basically what that says there is referring to 801-258. As soon as the January 1st hits, then those apply to this anyway. So we're just being redundant and we used to think it was good to have it, so it's more clear everything is located in one spot, but it just becomes every year if they're changing definitions that created issues.
Let me know if I'm capturing your ideas correctly too.
Yeah, looks good.
I think the one caveat here is if we have it in the Division 10 definitions for any sort of field enforcement, it's quick to look at and open and have rather than have to have something separate. So I think that was kind of the idea, but you have a really good point about having to continue to update, especially as it relates to technology. So maybe that would not be helpful. So good discussion point to have.
I guess one other question is, I know they changed that rule. Was there intent of the legislature to further define that? Because I think part of the issue was kids under 16 using e-bikes, and I think they wanted to allow some use of youth to use them. And so I'm just wondering if there's another round of statute changes coming up.
It's a great question. I'm unaware of additional statute changes, but as House Bill 4103 was enrolled, it did say that, where does it say that? A person may operate the following without any grant of driving privileges if the person is 16 years of age or older. You don't have to have a driver's license, but if you are under 16, under the statute, you cannot operate an e-bike.
And this issue came up in Central Oregon because a couple of years ago there was a fatality of a youth riding double on a sidewalk on the wrong way of the road, and I think their parents really pushed something to define youth using e-bikes, and I see every day I see youth on e-bikes. They're just everywhere out here. So,
Katie.
Yeah, so the initial bill included allowing people under 16 to drive class 1 side-by-side or side-by-sides, I see Ian in a side-by-side, class 1 e-bikes, and that portion was taken out of the bill. It wouldn't be surprising if there was another bill in future sessions that changed that, but at this point, that's not included in the statute.
John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just concur with that, what Katie just said. I know that folks have been part of a working group that kind of has been talking around micromobility safety and definitions, and the Oregon Micromobility Network has put out a policy statement for what they would like to. And one of the things, it would be reducing the age for class 1 bikes to not have an age limit, because here in Portland, Bike Town, our bike share system is all electric, and you have to be over 16 to utilize that those bikes. So, you know, there is going to be potentially some changes. That it might not be this year, it might not be next year, but you know, this is an evolving space in policy and definitions. And you know, we are focused here on e-bikes. There are a lot of other types of form factors in this space at low speed devices, you know, and some of them are in the you know, the other categories of like electric personal assisted mobility devices, you know, so it is evolving.
Thanks, John. That's a good note to kind of bring back up. At the first meeting we had maybe talked about micromobility devices, like the one wheels that Ian rides. There's also e-scooters, e-skateboards, all different kinds, and some of those low speed motorized recreational devices. There is that state micromobility working group, and because that working group is existing and doing lots of work on it right now, we are not going to address micromobility devices in this rulemaking. We don't want to get ahead or conflict with the working group at this time. We have some representatives of that working group in this group right now. Is there a quick update we could get based on or anything you could share? Tracy, a hand up.
Yeah, so that working group has put together an LC, a draft LC that is going to the state for to be sort of fully vetted out, and we expect to have that back in early December to talk more about with the working group. I would say that the focus of that working group has been on sort of the definitional, has been definitional with regard to like e-micro mobility devices, what are considered micro mobility devices, and then sort of basic rules around like helmet regulations, age regulations, those kind, and some sort of limited to use and education. So that's sort of where that work has been focusing, and we're basically waiting to hear back on the full draft LC.
Thanks, Peter. And the LC means legislative concept, yes?
Yes.
Great. Thanks. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, just a question for clarification. As we go through this e-bike policy, is there articulation around where e-bikes are going to be used in the park, whether we're talking about, you know, concrete asphalt or natural surface trails?
The current rule right now, as it stands, talks about trails that are 8 feet or wider. It doesn't reference the materials. And when we get into this next section here, we'll talk about how like appropriate operation of these of the e-bikes, and then where they could go. So yes and no. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but there's no specific reference to materials of trail. And Kim?
Could you scroll back up to the definition of motor vehicle?
Yes. And I will say it is changing.
Okay, because you know, a one wheel would fall under that definition, and an electric scooter, and so it might be an unintended consequence to have those be labeled as motor vehicles. Or maybe not.
That's a good point. We do want to be cognizant of unintended consequences. So this is the general park area rules that are potentially changing. Excuse me. And under these proposed changes, motor vehicle is going to change to a vehicle that is self-propelled or designed for self-propulsion, as it matches with the current Oregon statute. Does that help answer your question? We still have your hand up.
Oh, no, I don't mean to have my hand up, but no, it doesn't actually answer the question. It seemed like that broadened it, the definition.
Yeah, there's a difference in the statutory definitions of motor vehicle and vehicle, and I think that's supposed to help make those distinctions. We haven't gone that far, and we can look at those if that's helpful.
Okay.
Katie, do you mind copy and pasting into the chat the motor vehicle versus the vehicle definitions under the ORS?
Joe, I just put in the motor vehicle ORS. It's 801.360.
Oh, thanks.
And the vehicle one is, I think, 530, but I'll double check.
Okay, I can look it up and paste it. So here's the 801 definition for motor vehicle, and then it was 5 something, right, for vehicle?
590.
590. Yeah. So Kim, I agree with you that there's a vagueness here, and we can try to look at when we get the e-micro mobility guidance from the state working group down. I think that'll help capture like the one wheels and e-scooters in a way that's more specific. We can't change the state statute, but our rule can be more um, uh, I guess, restrictive is the word I'm thinking of, but that's not exactly it. But our rule can be more specific. There we go. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing I would want to do is make sure that you're aligning definitions of vehicles with what is going on in the state. Some, like the general vehicle one that you just showed is for highway definition. But in general, you want to, I would think, align with those definitions of what these devices are. Then the question is where they can be used and who has control of making that decision. But kind of redefining devices, and there are definitions for electric scooters that fit the one wheel and some other these micro mobility devices, and kind of what is a motorcycle, what is a ATV, and all these other things. That should just be kind of alignment. And then I would think this should be focused on where there's use, and then who has authority to define use in certain situations and how that goes. That's just my perception of.
Thank you. Okay, do we want to see how these definitions relate to the actual rules? And we can always come back and say, I don't remember what that definition said, or is it clear in the definition? And we can scroll back up. So we can move on to the next section. So under Chapter 10, Section 26, we have our operator, propelled vehicles, cycles, or similar devices rules. And we start with a person operating a bicycle, electric assisted bicycle, skateboard, scooter, roller or incline skate, or other wheeled operator propelled equipment that transports the operator on land must comply with the following. Motor vehicle and bicycle regulatory signs posted in park properties. Persons under 16 years of age are required to wear protective headgear. This is a current rule that we have right now. And any other requirements is outlined under ORS 801-150. And this part is where we decided not to explicitly put in the 16 years or younger restriction on the use of e-bikes, because that is, as far as enforcement goes, very difficult for our rangers to do. And we left it off because of the ongoing potential discussion on that changing. So there's a reference to the statute, kind of like what Ian mentioned earlier. We reference the statute rather than having it word for word, and it gives us flexibility when those statutes change a lot faster than some of our administrative rules. In the event that a person under 11 years of age violates the subsection, the notice of violation shall be issued to the person's parent, legal guardian, or person with legal responsibility. In the event that a person between 11 to 16 violates the subsection, the notice of violation may be issued to the violator or that person's parent, legal guardian, or person with legal responsibility. They also must restrict a manner of operation to a reasonable and prudent practice relative to terrain, prevailing conditions, equipment, personal capabilities, personal safety, and the safety of all other park users. This includes yielding the right-of-way to pedestrians and animals, dismounting and walking in congested areas and posted walk zones, slowing down to, these are some of the edits, to safe passing speed and making presence well known in advance and using caution when overtaking other persons or animals. Displaying adequate lighting during the hours of darkness where riding is permitted after dark in a day use area, in compliance with ORS chapters 814 to 816. Using caution when approaching turns or areas of limited sight distance and other concerns. Not disturbing or harassing wildlife as provided in OAR 736-1055. And operating in compliance with any additional vehicle requirements identified in ORS 814-488 when on public roads accessible by motor vehicles. This should be, that one should move. And avoiding reckless riding and reckless behaviors on park property. That's a pun. There we go. A person may operate bicycles, and then we're gonna make that reference to the ORS, but we also have defined bicycles up above, so we can get rid of that part. Or class 1 electric assisted bicycles on roads and trails at any park property, except where posted to specifically prohibit or conditionally restrict such activity. A person may operate class 2 and class 3 electric assisted bicycle on roads and trails where posted signs allow. The director designee may open or close roads and trails to the operation of non-motorized cycles, electric assisted bicycles, or similar devices based on evaluation of factors related to the use of these devices, including, but not limited to, the degree of conflict with other users, public safety, or damage to park resources. A person may not operate non-motorized cycles, electric assisted bicycles, scooters, or similar devices in those portions of a park property listed below, except where authorized by the director and posted specifically or conditionally to allow such activities. Off-roads or off-trails within designated historic or natural areas, natural forest areas, or natural area preserves, except on roads open for motor vehicles, on docks, piers, floats, and connecting ramps, and in areas specifically designed as free from this use. Individuals with mobility-related disabilities can use wheelchairs and manually powered mobility aids designed for use by individuals with mobility disabilities to access any areas open to pedestrian and bicycle use, and insert exceptions to other power mobility devices here. Helena, this is where I think we're going to tap on you to help make these distinctions. Assisted mobility aids, including OPDMV, to access areas where it is safe to operate at park manager discretion. And then any electric motorized devices that don't meet the definitions above are unregulated in Oregon and are not allowed on trails where vehicles are prohibited. I'm going to pause because this is a lot of areas for our discussion, and scroll back up to this
But it looks
section.
like there's a question in the Q&A about referencing electric personal assisted mobility devices. I think instead of segways is what it looks like that statute covers. John, does that seem right?
Oh, I was just kind of referencing it up higher during the definition discussion. It wasn't meant for here, but I was just kind of like, there is a definition for at least the mobility devices, and there's probably is for some other kind of, why not just utilize that definition for those devices, but not on the use side of things. So
Thanks, John. We'll look at that during definition alignment. So for this section and discussion, Peter, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just, so I guess as I understand point number 2 there, class 1s are allowed on roads or trails at any park property unless there's signage otherwise. So is section 5 later on where it says that, you can't operate e-bikes in these areas? Are we saying that like those, like there doesn't need to be any signage or something? It's just sort of known that these are areas where they can't be.
The key difference between section 2, 3, the rule 2, 3, and 5 is 5 also includes regular bicycles that are not e-bikes and other, and so where they are generally prohibited from unless otherwise posted.
Gotcha.
And then the 2 and 3 are these are starting points and up for discussion on where or how or what types of classifications will be allowed, right? But the 2 and 3 pertain specifically to the e-bikes.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, so my question is, when did we throw out the 8 foot wide trail thing?
We haven't thrown anything out yet. These are just suggested places to start discussion for this RAC.
I see. Okay. So you're throwing it out for discussion rather than proposing it.
Yes.
Okay.
The current challenge we have with the 8 foot or 8 feet or wider rule is that our trails don't always stay consistently 8 feet, nor do we mark where trails start and end 8 feet. There are places where electric assisted bicycles are allowed right now where they're shared pathways that are varying. So it's a difficult way to help categorize for the users, and was suggested that we could try to place classification as the measurement instead. Go ahead, Ian.
I guess now I have two things to say. So it just got brought up to me yesterday about the definition of 8 foot wide. Is like, what does that mean? Is that the surface of the tread? Like it's, wheels can go 8 feet wide, or if it's an old roadbed and you got a single track trail, well, technically it is 8 feet and we may be brushing it out to 8 feet wide, but is it a tread? So I don't know if I have an opinion on that, but that was brought up to me yesterday. And then my other point, once you're done with that, I want to go back to the section where talking about day use areas where use is permitted.
Yep.
And so the issue with that is I think a lot of use after dark would actually happen in campgrounds, and where you say only in areas day use areas permitted after dark. So so somehow we have to allow use at dark in campgrounds. And I guess one last point, you were talking about the under 16 operating e-bikes, and my understanding is with citation authority for the rangers, they can only cite what's in these rules, and so they can't cite like DMV laws. So we need to make sure that they can cite. And I'm not sure if the reference to the definition allows our rangers to cite if a kid is under 16.
Yeah, great points. This was after some discussion with park managers where they felt the citation for under 16 use was more appropriate with state police rather than the park rangers, just based on how to enforce. And the rangers would like to look at it more from an education approach and safety. So I think the leniency towards referencing the ORS was because of that. Tom?
Can we get back to where you're eliminating the 8 foot rule?
Okay, I'm not.
And one other thing, Joe, if we could get this, after today's meeting, I mean, I'm on the iPad right now and it's really hard to track as you're moving up and down. I think I'm getting a little dizzy too. Do you think you could, send a copy out so we could put a little more thought into this? It might be a little bit easier for some of us to track. But getting back to this the 8 foot rule that you're eliminating, do we even need that in there at all? Because I don't see how realistic it's going to be for you folks to post signage where it's going to be allowed. And currently, I mean, the reality is in state parks on 6 foot trails, you see e-bikes out there all the time. So you're obviously, you're unable to enforce it right now. And perhaps instead of, tightening down on this restriction, it might be better to loosen it up a little bit. And I don't see it being realistic to posting it where the trails become wider or get narrower. It just seems like it's going to be problematic on the enforcement issue.
Yeah, thank you. So let me clarify what I'm saying about that. the suggested edits here were put together by staff. They're not the full proposed changes. That's why we're having these discussions today. So we're not, the proposal here was to update it, maybe instead of having the 8-foot rule and instead of having to try and define where trail sizes change, or just like what Ian said, what does that even mean? We don't really know. So whether that's, you know, the top part of the trail or where we brush to, etc. So the suggestion here was that we would just go and say class 1 e-bikes are allowed where other bicycles are operating unless it's posted that they cannot. And then class 2s and 3s are not allowed unless there are posted signs where they are allowed. So that was.
But we get back to the enforcement issue. I mean, do you have any data on how many citations have been written for people riding electric bikes on trails that are less than 8 feet? I suspect you probably are slim to none, while there's thousands and thousands of people out there doing it. So is, you know, making all these rules so tight, is it really a good thing for you guys to manage?
Can you help me understand what you mean by so tight?
Well, well, first of all, you're starting off with the 8-foot wide trail.
We are not.
Now you're proposing to post signage where it's going to be allowed.
Right. So instead of the current rules right now are the 8-foot, right? And you're right, Tom, I don't have any data available to me right now on if we've issued citations for e-bike use on that. I suspect too that it's probably low. So what we're suggesting instead is that we put signs where they are allowed and where they're not allowed.
Wouldn't it turn into just visual pollution on the trail though? I mean, you're going to have signage everywhere. I mean, there's some common sense I think it needs to play into this. For one, I think it's just getting too tight. The rules are becoming too stringent. And if you can't enforce them, then what's the even reason to have them?
That's a good point. I will write that down. Go ahead, Kim.
Well, I'm just going to go on record as saying that on number 2, electric bikes are motor vehicles, and I don't care whether you have to pedal them in order to get the motor assist or not. They're still motorized. And to just make it a blanket thing that says bicycles can go, or they can go everywhere on any trail, is insane. From the equestrian standpoint, there's a gigantic safety issue here. And to just blithely allow them everywhere that all other non-motorized vehicles and or non-motorized users are allowed is a real concern to us. The second thing is a little further down, you talked about slowing to a safe passing speed. When you're passing a horse, there isn't a safe passing speed. You need to stop and talk to the person who's riding and saying, and talk about what's the safest way to pass. If it's a really seasoned horse that's trained, that's no big deal. The person can just, you know, ride on by. But if the horse is not accustomed to e-bikes or not accustomed to bicycles, you're going to have a rider end up in the hospital because somebody decided that slowing down to 10 miles an hour was plenty slow and didn't realize how sensitive the animals were that they were going to be passing.
Thanks, Kim. Peter? Simon?
No, sorry, I just on mute. One thing that I wanted to bring into the discussion from the working group with regard to like the different classifications of e-bikes is when we were talking with like sort of enforcement experts on that kind of stuff, it sort of came up that like having a police officer or some other type of enforcement expert have to judge sort of on the spot. Is that a class 1 e-bike or is that a 2 or a 3 is really difficult? And so how we tried to deal with that was more sort of focusing on use and like making the rules around use. So it would be easier from the enforcement perspective, at least when we were talking in that group, folks felt like it would be easier from an enforcement perspective to focus on things like the speed of travel or like helmet use or something like that, rather than on sort of technical aspects of the actual devices themselves, because that's really hard to judge sort of in the moment.
Go ahead, Simon.
Peter kind of said a lot of what I was going to say about the definitions and stuff like that. Like us as rangers out in the field, we're going to have a hard time defining like those, let alone like knowing the actual differences between them. That's going to be an uphill slope. And so I totally agree that it's going to behoove us to focus more on the safety aspects of things and the type of use and stuff like that, rather than, basing it just specifically on the class 1, class 2, class 3 definitions, just on the enforcement side, because we're dealing with so much other stuff. But on the flip side of that, maybe it would still be good to have it in rule. That way we can reference it and use it as an education standpoint, but not necessarily have that be the focus of the enforcement on contact. Have the safety side of things be the focus, and the actual use of the e-bikes, I think, might be the right way to go about it. But that way it can still be in rule, so that we could reference it just in terms of education, or in terms of even if it has to get to the point, citation and stuff like that. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have those definitions in there, but being able to reference them and focus more on the safe use and stuff like that.
Okay, thanks. I know that the scrolling back and forth is a little dizzying, so Katie's going to help take notes on a different document, and we'll just be able to kind of look at this and discuss. Dale, I see your comment. I'm going to have you go after Elliot. So we'll go Will, Elliot, Dale, and then Ian. Go ahead, Will.
Okay. I think my comment is a sort of a combination and a build off of like several comments, particularly one around metrics, and then one related to when I was asking about if this ruling around e-bikes and the e-bike policy for state parks is going to be more articulated down to the kinds of places they can be used. Because I will say, yes, I think that is the direction this does need to go. I think this is potentially too high and too broad the way this is, I think, being approached. Because I will say right now that the ADA rule and law as a civil rights law, like a reminder, is pretty specific about where these OPDMDs can be used. And no, you cannot ask anyone if they roll up on an e-bike on a trail whether or not they have a disability. And if this e-bike or whatever mobility device that you might not think is a wheelchair or offered wheelchair, you cannot ask them for proof of their disability and whether they are using it as that. But they can just say that. And I'm not going to say that people aren't going to abuse that. I do not think that's going to happen. So, but what I am going to say also is that back to Tom's comment about metrics, we do need metrics, because as a part of the OPDMD policy, because I did note in here, as you were scrolling down in there, it said something about the park manager's discretion around the use of an electric bike or anything. We don't have that. We don't have that ability to make it park manager's discretion. The OPDMD policy is really specific that you have to have guidelines around the type, size, weight, and you have to evaluate your trails and the spaces based on natural and cultural resources, as well as environmental impact, pedestrian volume, all those things. And you cannot do any of those things unless we're actually taking measurements on the trails and measuring pedestrian volume.
Thanks, Will. Go ahead, Elliot.
I just wanted to comment on defining the classes of the e-bikes. In the industry, we are starting to change some of the language that we use to try to talk about e-bikes. And one of the things that we're saying for class 1 and class 3 e-bikes is the language of we use the phrase "is not capable of exclusively propelling the bicycle." So a class 1 or a 3 we would say is not capable of exclusively propelling the bicycle. That's just allowing the difference between people saying, oh, it's a throttle or not a throttle. If your law enforcement rangers are trying to have that discussion with somebody, they can say, is it exclusively propelled by pedaling? And that kind of helps define some of the character, because the industry is challenged with this process as well, trying to figure out, hey, can I legally sell that e-bike to a 16-year-old, let's say? These kind of things are definitely creeping up in our business. So just throwing that out there, might be not terrible language to look at, to add into our stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. So Dale, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment with regards to the same thing on the classes of e-bikes. I think it's really hard, especially for any type of rangers or enforcement, to guess on what class e-bike it is and things like that. I've had a couple of people say, does the bike have pedals, or can you actually pedal it, or are there no pedals? If there are no pedals, it's kind of a motorcycle or a moped, and if there are pedals, it's an e-bike. And I think trying to define what class of e-bike it is kind of irrelevant, because you're really more concerned with, I think someone mentioned, how what's your intent in your usage of it? Are you using it in bad, are you using it poorly, or are you using it, with some kind of common sense on the road? When talking about horses, I've ridden on trails with horses before, and I always go up, obviously, really slow on that, and let them know if I'm going to pass them, that I'm going to pass them, and I either walk past them or I go super slow, because I understand that some horses are going to get, out of it, or don't want anybody to get hurt. But I also understand that there's going to be kids out there, or people that are not very responsible, that could go whizzing by. So there's certainly a difference between the two attitudes on the trail on how you're going to do that. And it really doesn't matter if I have a super powerful bike or not, and the kid has a tricycle that he's trying to ride by. It's really is, what do you, how you're acting on the trail. So I think that to be able to restrict usage based on that is more important than restricting on, do you have a class 1 e-bike, do you have a class 2 e-bike? I've even seen class 3 e-bikes with stickers that people buy off Amazon that say class 2 e-bike. And I mean, what's up with that? So that's kind of what I had to say on this. That's it.
Yeah. Are you having a hard time finding that raise your hand button on your screen? If you are, you should have a thing called React. And if you click on that, it may allow you to have that raise your hand button. Elliot, I don't know if you oh, just kidding. Okay, go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, I'm kind of going to repeat what Dale just said. It's the industry, it's all over the board, like to be able to tell if something's a throttle or not. Like you see a kid riding down and they're not pedaling, it's like, well, that's only a throttle only. So it's really difficult. Even some of the definitions, there's a lot of e-bikes that go over 30 miles an hour, and you can, people are modifying stuff or just buying them straight off that way. So from, I think, an Oregon statute, like I think anything over 30 miles an hour is technically considered a motorcycle. And if it's pedal and electric, if it doesn't fit those E definitions, I think it becomes a moped, which I believe you have to have a driver's license for that too. So it's hard to tell some of that. And I also agree the whole behavior thing, that's the huge deal. And when I'm in the Dry Canyon Trail in Redmond, it's like a 12-foot wide paved path. And most, we slow down when we pass other people, and a lot of people do. And every once in a while you see a kid or, somebody races by really fast, doesn't slow down or anything. I think that's the situations that get people fired up of, of kind of rude behavior. And so, trying to set standards, and it's not like somebody's gonna be out there writing tickets for that. But if we, if people know what the rules are, you need to slow down, you need to pass. We're trying to generate compliance by writing rules that may not be enforceable, but like people know how to play the game, that they have to have their helmet on, they have to stay to the right side of the trail, they announce themselves in passing.
Thanks, Ian. Amelia?
Hi, yes. I hope I'm not distracting us. I guess I really like the idea, of course, showing what good behavior is across any uses of the state park. And of course, with changing abundance of different uses, and of course, different state parks would deal with a different abundance of different users. But it would be really helpful for me to know, I guess, from state parks, are any of the enforcement strategies we're discussing realistic to enforce on the ground? Or is anything we're talking about just headaches for state parks, or can they put signs up? I realize every state park's a little different. Or would we train people to recognize different bikes? I just wondering what's realistic on the enforcement side on the ground.
Simon, can I punt that one over to you?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, any rule that we enforce, it can obviously be a headache, but I feel like with most of our enforcement rangers, we're all trusted to be able to make good judgment calls out there. And I feel like most of us do most of the time. And so that's where it comes down to, it's like, that safe use and responsible use. And as enforcement officers, we have an obligation to make those contacts if we see something that might not be safe, or is affecting natural resources and stuff like that. And for me, that's where I make that judgment call. If I see something like that on the beach, like for example, if somebody's riding an e-bike down the beach when it's a really busy day during the summer at Cape Kiwanda, then I might stop them and make that contact and just kind of try to educate them, instead of just going to like a citation first type of thing, because I feel like with the education, we're able to change that behavior a little bit, I guess. And most of the time, that's a really good tool for us to use, is just the education side of things. So I feel like as rangers, we're gonna, especially with this e-bike stuff, we're gonna be relying on that education and just having those conversations with the users. And there's going to be, some challenges when it comes to that, of course. But I feel like the rangers, they have a good idea on, how to go about those contacts in a respectful way. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yes, thank you. I was just responding to the 8-foot trail sounded pretty unrealistic. So it's nice to hear that those education interactions are helpful.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Amelia. Some of the other strategies that came up in our discussion today included potentially looking at behavioral things, like speed. Unfortunately, our rangers do not have the capability to enforce based on speed. They don't have speedometers. We don't have active speed limit radar signs in parks and on trails. So that's a difficult one. And then some of the other challenges brought up here today about not being able to tell, not even by class. Sometimes it's hard to tell if bikes are e-bikes or not, just as the technology gets better and better, the battery packs get smaller and the mountain bikes get beefier. There are some distinctions, especially from a distance, to be able to tell what the bikes are. So there's some enforcement challenges associated with that. I do want to pause real quick because there's a question in the chat from John. Are there issues of behavior with standard bicycles and mountain bikes as it relate to other users? Can you expand on that question a little bit, John? And then Simon, I might put you on.
Yeah, I mean, I assume before e-bikes came out, and maybe still are, that those conflicts between, and I've seen them, I've been on trails where there's mountain bikers coming down the hill, and the path, and there's conflicts there. The speed of an e-bike going downhill is not much different than a regular cyclist. I mean, it in paths. Now going uphill is different. I just wonder how we mitigate these issues already with cyclists and hikers or equestrian or other trail users. And is there any difference there, or should we be, is there a need for specific kind of thoughts as it relates to e-bikes versus these other types of cycling?
Great question. Simon, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can't say I've had too many experiences with bicycles on our trails around here because our trails are very narrow, and honestly, they're just not good for that user group. So I don't have a ton of experience with that, at least in my management unit. I don't know if there's other park folks on the chat that have had experience with that before. But I can't say I've got a ton of firsthand experience with that, so I'm not sure if I'm the best one to answer that question.
We have had other issues with trail conflicts and some parks that have more bicycle activity, like Step Stewart and Silver Falls. And John, you're right, like speed can be an issue regardless of e-bike or not in some cases. And there are other cases where e-bikes have a distinct advantage in speed and can cause other issues. So those have come up before. I think Kim and then Ian.
I would just echo that. Yes, there are problems with behavior of people on standard bikes. And what we've tried to do to mitigate that is educate. That has some success, but there are always people who ride faster than they should or just don't have the good behavior that they ought to. I will say, though, when the Forest Service and BLM were first looking at whether to allow mountain bikes on non-motorized trails, they made the decision, the blanket decision, that they would be allowed on any non-motorized trail unless specifically prohibited. And I bet if you polled 50 Forest Service people who work in trails today, every single one of them is going to say, wow, I wish we hadn't been quite that liberal, because there are places where it's just not appropriate for them to be sharing the trails with hikers and horses, but we allowed it and now we can't stop it. And I really hesitate. I mean, I really urge this group to be thoughtful about this, because once they're allowed, you can't stop them from being there, even if you realize later on, oops, we made a mistake here. So let's err on the side of being conservative, please.
Ian?
Yeah, I've been rock climbing out at Smith Rock for over 30 years now, and every weekend I'm hiking into the park with a backpack on, and it's, Smith Rock is a very hiker, pedestrian, a lot of pedestrian people and stuff. And originally Smith Rock was not, like, the master plan said it was not open to mountain bike use, and just one day they just started coming and signs, the park allowed mountain bike use. And so it just it kind of occurred over time as mountain bikes became more popular. I've never had an issue with a mountain biker on the trail. They, in the main climbing areas and stuff, they tend to ride really slow. They're just down on the river trail, but they've been pretty good with people. And I've ridden mountain bikes some out at Smith Rock, not a whole lot, but every time I have, I slowed down and people moved over to the side and let me pass. And so I honestly, I've never seen an issue out there with that. So.
If you can find parking, that is.
Can't find parking, yeah.
Yes. At state parks, we have that wonderful problem of having lots of attention, good attention, people wanting to come and recreate, trying to make space for that. And it does lead to these potential conflict issues. So I'm going to pause real quick. There aren't any questions in the Q&A right now. And I think I'm caught up to speed on the chat, but just to recap a little, what I'm hearing is we want more data on what are the metrics to allow and not allow, and that making classification decisions may not be the best way. That I've heard both. Let's not be too restrictive and let's be conservative. And that there are behavioral issues related with any type of bicycle use, whether it's e-bike or not. And how do we help target and enforce those things without making an enforcement an impossible barrier to rulemaking? Does that sound accurate so far? Does anyone disagree with the things I've said? Okay. We can come back to where things are allowed and not allowed. I do want to do a quick time check. We have a little less than an hour with our time, and I do want to make sure that we have discussion based on section 6 here. Individuals with mobility related disabilities and use of operator propelled vehicles here, or what do you call it? We called it, Tom, I'm getting a little car sick, like scrolling myself, so I really understand. Operator propelled vehicles, cycles, and similar devices. And just so you all know, after our meeting, I'll compile these with the notes that Katie's taking right now, and I will email them all to you so that you have both the document and the notes. So as we get into this rule, Helena, I know we have talked a little bit with other people in the agency about what this rule particularly means, the intent, and some of the confusing language around the other power-driven mobility devices. Can you give us an easier rendition of what the intent of this part of the rule is?
Well, I think the reality is that we need to make sure that wherever the public can go, it's also inclusive of people with disabilities and the devices they need in order to give them mobility. And that isn't always a wheelchair. It can be an other power-driven mobility device, which can include an e-bike. And to Will's point, you know, we're not going to stop people and say, hey, are you using that because of a disability? Although the ADA does say we can ask for the assurance. So I was looking that up when Will was talking. There is some qualifiers on that, where the ADA does state that we can say something. I'll find it here in a minute. But the restriction part is safety, right? So the only time that we're going to say, you know, a golf cart isn't the best vehicle to use down this trail because it's unsafe. However, an e-bike may be just fine because of the safety aspect of that trail. So there are considerations and factors that the ADA posts that we would have to consider when not allowing an other power-driven mobility device. So we can insert them here. And I think the state of Washington State Parks does this as well. They actually inserted those restrictions, basically the type, size, weight, dimension, and speed of the device, like to consider these factors. The volume of pedestrian traffic. So sometimes you'll find campers wanting to drive their ATV from their campsite to the restroom. But if there's a lot of campers and it's a lot of pedestrian use, that may be unsafe for both the driver, the person with a disability, and the other campgoers. The facility's design and operational characteristics, if there's legitimate safety concerns, and then whether the use of the device creates substantial risk of harm to the environment, natural or cultural resource as well. So what we're trying to say here is that basically a person with a disability is allowed to use their mobility device, including an other power-driven mobility device. And I think what we want to say here is, with the exception of if there's a safety concern, and then list what's listed on the ADA. So we're really kind of referencing the ADA there and not just saying discretionary decision. I think we've used discretionary decision before because it's been like case by case from one side of the region to another. So like the eastern side of Oregon has a lot more space in some campgrounds versus some of the other campsites in the valley or the coastal range. So there's been that need for discretionary decision making. But I think if we're just super prescriptive to what the ADA states, we'll be fine. Let's see, I think I just scanned a note from Will. Yeah. So yeah, Will kind of dropped them in there in the chat. So it's just reflective of what the ADA states. And I think it's also important to know that in the ADA, it says public entities may not ask individuals using such devices about their disability, but may ask for a credible assurance that the device is required because of a disability. So that is within reason. Now, we would train rangers on this topic and say, let's talk about this. Why would we stop somebody and ask if they're using this for because of a disability? Is it because this device is not allowed by anybody on this trail? Or is it because you pick somebody out because they're driving too fast? Is it behavior based? So we'd have a really kind of in-depth training to talk about why we would stop somebody and ask. And this is where the rangers, like to Simon's point, they're really good about their educational aspect, safety first, making sure that they're also well aligned with the rules. But again, we would be tying training into these conversations as well. Does that help, Joe, answer your question?
Yeah, it really does. Thank you. And I just want to follow up with the ADA reference that Will has in the chat. There's also a comment included that it needs to be measured and filed in order to draft the agency's policy. Those metrics will all be measured in the park's ADA plans, correct?
To draft your agency's policy. Oh, for the trails themselves, you mean?
Or I guess where we would prohibit. So if someone would like to use like a golf cart as their other power driven mobility device, but the width of trail can't accommodate a golf cart safely, we have the trail and the width of the trail documented somewhere where we can say,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm with you on that. Yes, exactly. Like that is the intent of that comment, right? Is that we can't just say that, because the other piece of this that I would note is that I think what becomes problematic, because people jokingly call the OPDMD policy or rule the ATV rule, right? Because if we see park staff driving around in gators or golf carts, people are then going to say, why can't I use that on the trail? And so we need to be able to like let people know that natural surface trail, paved boards, crushed gravel, whatever the deal is, that we go through, measure widths, measure slopes, show like why we can't allow vehicles of certain weights, types, propulsion, whether it's like, it's an internal combustion engine, whether it's electric, any of these things, and show like why they can't be in these spaces, and then put that stuff on your website in advance, so when people, before they even go, know where they can and cannot go. Absolutely.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and we do have that outlined in the ADA transition plan, and we can kind of point to that too in the rule.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Well, make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's. Okay. Does anyone have any further questions on this part? Okay. Well, let's keep moving down. We have a few more rules to talk about, and then we can go back up, because I do want to get back to where e-bikes are allowed and not allowed. So keep that in the back of your mind. For chapter 736, we are going to continue with division 10, section 25. This is the motor vehicle part of our rules. So this talks about cars and RVs and other things that are classified as motor vehicles. All park area roadways are considered public roadways, and all provisions of the Oregon Vehicle Code, ORS, chapters 801 through 826 are applicable and enforceable on such roadways. Motorists must comply with motor vehicle regulatory signs posted on park properties. Motor vehicles, trailers, or other vehicles shall be operated only on public roadways and in other portions of park properties designated for motor vehicle use by signs or park employees. I'm going to pause right here because in ORS 801 through 826, they have redefined it. So electric e-bikes, class 1, 2, and 3 are not considered motor vehicles. So these won't apply to e-bikes. But going on, where not otherwise posted, motor vehicles may not be operated within a park property at speeds in excess of 25 miles per hour. Violation of this rule is a Class B violation. And then just a reminder, the ORSs are enforced by Oregon State Police, and OARs, such as this whole rule that we're doing now, are enforced by our park rangers. Motor vehicles, trailers, or other vehicles shall be parked only in designated parking areas. And it goes on some more. The department may have a vehicle towed at the owner's expense if the vehicle is parked in a fire lane, roadway, campsite, entryway, driveway, closed area, or other location in a manner that threatens park resources, impedes park operations or safety, or any combination thereof. Abandoning a vehicle or leaving a vehicle unattended for 72 hours or more at a park property without permission from the park manager is prohibited and is a Class B violation. Vehicles abandoned for 72 hours or more, or vehicles owned by a person who has been excluded from a park property or who is in violation of criminal trespass may be towed at the owner's expense. Parking a motor vehicle or a trailer overnight in a day-use area is prohibited without written permission of the park manager or designated park employee, and such vehicles are subject to towing at the owner's expense. Unlicensed motorized vehicles, except department service vehicles, may not be operated in park properties unless otherwise posted, with the exception of other power-driven mobility devices operated within the constraints established in section 11. So just what Will had mentioned. A person may only operate an off-highway vehicle, OHV, on park property in designated off-highway riding areas or on park roadways which are signed for OHV use during those seasons and hours of operation which are established by the park manager, below the maximum permissible decibel levels as published on the state park website on July 1st, 2013. The park manager or park employee designated by the park manager will allow the use of other power-driven mobility devices by individuals with mobility disabilities in areas open to the public unless it is determined that the device cannot be operated in accordance with the legitimate safety concerns of the operator, park visitors, park resources, and park facilities. In determining if the device can be operated in a safe manner, the manager designee will consider the following criteria. And this is some more of those ADA requirements: type, size, weight, dimensions, and speed of device, volume of pedestrian traffic, facilities design and operational characteristics, whether legitimate safety requirements can be established, and whether the use of other power-driven mobility device creates a substantial risk of serious harm to the immediate environment or natural or cultural resources, or poses a conflict with applicable state laws and regulations. Pause to just check the chat here. None of this seems conflicting of what we have been discussing. And there's no questions. Okay. And the reason this rule was included is, well, Ian, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I just caught the wording about off-highway vehicle, and we might want to change that to all-terrain vehicle, ATV. I don't know if it's defined anywhere in statute, off-highway vehicle. I know we tried to change the language to off-highway vehicle, and since it's all buried in statute, it's always been stuck with ATV, and we've been switching over and trying to use the term ATV instead of off-highway vehicle. I can check in some of my section if it seems like somewhere we might have a thing saying that off-highway vehicle also means ATV.
Okay. Thanks. Katie, Helena, do you know if this changes on the park area rule change coming up?
It isn't right now, but we could put it there because we haven't opened those rules yet.
Okay. Yeah, either way, we can make that more consistent. Thanks, Ian. Okay, let's go back here then. We seem to be on the same page about the rules for motorized vehicles and for wheelchairs. Where I'm feeling the most disagreement on right now is back to where we would allow electric assisted bicycles, whether they're class 1, 2, or 3. And I'd love to open the discussion up to what reasonable measures people would like to see, what things that they see are as major challenges. We've talked about some of the behaviors that are concerning and how to educate around those behaviors and what we can and can't enforce. Are there other concerns or inputs or comments people have?
I have just a question, and you know, is why do people perceive class 2 as a different type of riding experience? I mean, or different risk issue than class 1? Because it's if you're worried about speed, they're both the same speed, you know, as limited, you know, by both the rule and also by the manufacturers. And if we think that there's a performance difference between riding, there has been no evidence in research showing this. You know, so it can be anecdotal. And I know that there are some, you know, kind of anecdotes about this. But I guess I'm having an issue about, you know, why are we segregating, you know, the devices by that first, you know, as a question.
Good question. Lieutenant Heisenkamp, do you have a reply to that question or do you have a new question?
New question. It's about age that we can see there, but also just about enforceability and, you know, user behavior.
Okay, hang on to that real quick. Let's answer John's question first about what is the distinction between class 1 versus class 2, right? Is what you're asking, aside from maybe anecdotal things. And I will fully admit this distinction here that we put in for the sake of discussion was based on the visibility of pedaling for the assistance, and then the throttle association with more like dirt bikes or motorcycles that have a throttle and fixed pedals that are harder to see. So that's a really good point, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Are there other people who think or see or are concerned about the distinctions between class 1 and class 2, and if it is worthwhile separating them or maybe not?
And just a clarification point, a class 2 bike has to have pedals. Now you can actuate it by pedaling or actuate it by pushing the throttle, or both at the same time. But they have to, if it doesn't have pedals, it's a different class of bike. And I know there's confusion with, you know, motocross bikes and other type of vehicles that are used out in off-trail issues. So just I wanted to put that.
Thanks. Elliot?
Just want to, you know, talk on that point a little bit. So the class 2s what I see is most of the mountain bike trail systems in Oregon that do allow e-bikes do not allow class 2 e-bikes. The distinction comes from you can ride it without pedaling, and those folks have a tendency to ride faster and more recklessly is what we see in the mountain bike world in Oregon. Now, in state parks, I want to be real careful not to stifle the class 2s because I live just north of South Beach State Park, and there's a trail system that drops them off on the Jetty Road. And they go to the day use areas and the Rogue for lunch and stuff like that. By far, number one is class 2s. And you see a lot of people. You go there on a Saturday and a Sunday in the summer, you're going to see 15, 20 e-bikes locked up out in front of Rogue, people having lunch and going back. That does go back to the comment earlier about parking in state parks. These folks are now bringing their RVs into South Beach State Park and using their e-bikes as mobility devices throughout our community, which is a bonus. I do see the conflict that occurs on mountain bike trails, however. It could be two different subjects we want to talk about there, but it's hard to say. It's a different rider experience, let's put it that way. Thank you.
Amelia, do you have any more on this topic?
Yeah, I was just hoping, because I didn't know a lot about class 1 and class 2 either, maybe Elliot or somebody who's used both of them. Is the ability to slow down and stop for other park users the same between the two? Like the braking ability is the same?
Yes, any e-bike that is operable in Oregon should have an automatic disconnect from their electric motor as soon as the brakes are applied.
Thanks, Elliot. Okay, Lieutenant, what was your comment?
Just as I've been listening today, it sounds like many of the concerns are about safe operation and user behavior. And earlier, I think it was Tom and Peter both talked about enforceability of some of this stuff and just access for the state police to go and enforce it. But between the time something gets reported, depending on how the description of the person is, and by the time we find them, we may not even be able to locate the people. And that's also in addition to, how can we enforce, or how can we expect the troopers to know different types of bikes, trail widths, even signage. And so I wanted to kind of bring everybody's attention to H, which is already listed in red, but avoiding reckless riding and reckless behavior on park property. That whole line could really use some rework. I think maybe getting rid of avoiding and just put prohibited would be a nice addition to that. And then reckless is actually defined in ORS, which instead of just writing reckless, maybe pull some of the language over from the ORS and place it in here. But we may as a group think our own wording is better than what's in statute too. Reckless is kind of the more severe, like when you think of reckless driving versus careless driving is the lesser, and they're both defined differently. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Also just so everybody's fairly clear that from our standpoint, from the state police response and enforcement standpoint, it would be difficult for us to respond and find the people that are in violation of these particular types and widths and things like that. Much easier just to go with, hey, I'm reporting somebody that's misbehaving on the path and they've been, riding their, whatever it is, recklessly, and then let the person describe what the person was doing and then allow us the opportunity to follow up and locate them.
Thank you. And then, John, just to go back to the class 1 versus 2 and 3, the Forest Service in Deschutes County, so Deschutes National Forest has recently been looking at allowing e-bikes on their trails, and their limitations, I think, are only open to class 1 e-bikes and not 2s and 3s. So that may have been the trying to align with land management agency partners as a first step here.
Yeah, I just feel like it's if you're trying to distinguish the two, it's harder, you know. I think I did put a note in there that's, you know, like California does have a labor requirement, and the industry itself is trying to look into proper labeling to distinguish between the bikes. But when you talk about, you know, potential ADA issues and trail access, one of the big things that we see on roadway, not on, I don't know about trails, but roadway is the ability to do the actuation with the throttle as being a positiveness to allow people to bike is important. It's not that they only use the throttle, but they do, you know, actuate the bike with the throttle sometimes. So it does expand your kind of abilities to experience trail riding for people that may have ADA issues. So anyways, I'll just end that.
Thank you. Kim?
I just wanted to clarify with respect to the Deschutes National Forest decisions about allowing e-bikes on specific trails. Yes, you're right. It only relates to class 1 e-bikes, but it also, they're only allowed on designated bike trails, not on any multi-use trails.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to take this to look at the meeting chat. Okay, there's some reference to NPS and the environmental assessments. Oh, and great, and some other state park information. Laurel, you said it looks like NPS allows different parks to manage for the various classes separately. For 1 and 2, but not 3. Is that for all national parks? Or is it...
No, if that was the way it was worded, I was just copying and pasting from their FAQ document. It looks like they could say we allow 1 or 1 and 2 or 1 and 2, but not 3. I mean, they can pick and choose by superintendent. They can decide by park, it looks like. I mean, they could allow class 3. That's not what I'm.
Okay, thanks for
that. That was just copying and paste from their frequently asked questions page.
Simon?
Yeah, Joe, do you have any feedback from some of the park managers and other folks you talk to about conflicts between hikers and, you know, even just like regular bicycles on trail, or specifically e-bikes that you can share with us? Because I feel like there hasn't been a lot of talk about potential conflicts that have actually occurred in state parks, and I'd just be curious to hear if you've had that feedback or not.
Yeah, of course. So before the RAC met too, there was an internal OPRD group that met to try to put some of these recommended places to start discussion and some changes that we could look at. And in that group were several park managers and park rangers. And throughout the last couple of years, we've been having a lot of discussions about what they've been seeing and what issues have been cropping up. So most of the visitor conflict issues are surrounded by that I guess like reckless or careless behavioral operational use of e-bikes, people going too fast, especially through campgrounds. So we're not even talking about trails at this point, but just campgrounds, and coming out really quickly in front of large RVs that may not be able to see them very well, or where it's very congested and crowded. We also have issues with people taking the e-bikes on places where they are currently prohibited from, And we'll talk about this a lot at our next meeting for ocean shores. Like currently, they're not allowed on the ocean shore unless it is open for motor vehicles. And then even for like regular bikes and people and dogs, we have a hard time keeping people out of the snowy plover areas. They're a protected species, so we work with other land management agencies to enforce that. And so there's a whole host of different issues based on access and conflicts. Mostly, it sounds like with e-bikes, people are getting in accidents on their own because they're going too fast through campgrounds and crashing. There have been a couple stories that I've heard where it does involve another person, but some of the safety issues that have been repeatedly coming up are mostly sort of self-contained. Ian.
I work a lot with Hood River County Forestry, and they have Post Canyon, Family Man, Seven Streams areas, and pretty famous mountain bike riding areas. So quite a few years ago, the advisory committee, they allowed class 1. They made a decision to allow class 1 e-bikes on the Hood River mountain bike trails. And that difference between the class 1 and 2, it's they're all going about the same speed. I think it's more of an ethical debate when you're a bike rider and you have to use pedal power to get up something, and then they see somebody who's not pedaling at all. I think it just rubs people the wrong way when they see that. They could just go without pedaling. So
Thank you. Dale?
Yeah, so I was going to say, with regards to a lot of the complaints or the trying to enforce it, it's not whether people are riding a class 1, 2, or 3 e-bike. That has nothing to do with it. It's the behavior. And I guess the big question is, how do you legislate behavior, a good behavior, I guess, and trying to just get off of the class thing. And I understand, I think Elliot mentioned before, how some riders, they have different preferences on how they ride their bikes. And that's going to be kind of the same for anybody. And so anyway, that's getting off to the woods there. So that's what my only comment.
That's the $1 million question, Dale. I'm so glad you brought it up. How do we encourage good behavior? And if people were nice and considerate everywhere, we wouldn't maybe have to have so many rules. Anyone else?
Yeah, I put my hand back up.
Go ahead,
One of the things, and we've dealt with issues with ATVs and youth operating ATVs, and especially when it comes to roads. And ODOT brought this up at one point in time, is that they said, kids under 16 haven't gone through driver education. They don't know all the rules of the road like adults with driver's licenses. And so that right there is a key, kind of separation between youth and adults. And that's, the most issues I have with e-bikes on trails is when it's usually youth who are operating them, and they're not really yielding to other people and kind of respecting other people's space because they haven't been taught that. So I think there's an element of a education thing. It's probably a lot bigger than this group, but like an Oregon-wide national, like, how do you operate e-bikes? And I know in Central Oregon, it's been a big issue, and some of the schools have actually banned kids from arriving at school with an e-bike, because kids were just riding their e-bikes to school, and they're like, well, you're not even allowed to do that. That's not a legal operation.
Thanks, Ian. Simon?
Yeah, one thing I want to add real quick is in regards to the different classes of e-bikes is whether or not we do away with those definitions in our rules. I think there needs to be something that specifies, okay, if this isn't a class 1, 2, or 3 e-bike, we might want to think about saying that, because people can put so many new modifications on e-bikes from what I've heard. And so having something in rule about that, if it's not a class 1, 2, or 3, then it's, maybe look at, saying, hey, anything other than these classes, it's going to be a no-go, because, you look at some of these modifications, like they can go over the 28 miles an hour for the class 3s and things like that. So I think that's another concern that we should look at, and maybe putting it in rules somehow.
Yeah, we can finesse this language here on 7. I think that came up during that staff discussion. Definitely the modifications are a little scary because we don't know how fast or how far people can modify their bikes. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just a couple points. That specific point, California has just recently, and Utah has just recently added it to their e-bike definitions around out of class bikes, and just giving some language in general for the state. So, I think that's something that, again, should be looked at the state level. I don't know if it would hurt, it doesn't hurt probably adding that in here to kind of define them. But, again, kind of getting out in front of a state regulation, but it's probably an interesting place to kind of talk about these out of class, or what more there are is not sold out of class, is that they can be manipulated or changed once you purchase it. A lot of it's just software based, so you're just kind of tweaking it. So that can happen, and but the industry is very kind of been looking at this issue, and now we have a couple states kind of playing around with language to put some at least teeth in the sale of these bikes. And then the question is, how do you manage? And I think we've had a good conversation here around issues about behavior, and how do people choose to address this. The one point that I had originally raised my hand that I just wanted to add in here is kind of thinking, I think traditionally when I think of trails, or when you all are kind of putting these rules, I think of, hey, I go to a trailhead and I go up a trail into a very kind of rural or a state park area. But there are places in Oregon where the state park butts up against urbanized areas, or at least people that utilize state park trails to get to different places. I'm thinking, like in Bend, isn't there a state park in the middle of like Bend? Or I'm not sure if that is official. And I would hate to say, and obviously you could post it maybe differently, but is somebody's using that to go through and they're on a class 3 bike, are they going to get not in trouble? But we kind of like, people utilize these state trails for lots of different purposes. So
Thanks, John. Those are all good points. Elliot?
Yeah, hi. I know you mentioned that like the Rangers don't have speed guns and stuff like that, radar guns, but sometimes it seems like maybe we should focus on, once again, back to usage and speeds and how people are recreating in Oregon State parks. One of the things I want to warn against here is we're working on this thing in the electric bike world is in its, I wouldn't say in its infancy, but it's certainly in its adolescence. We are not a mature thing yet. And so maybe we want to make sure that we're looking at this in a 10-year picture. What is our growth period that we want to work on this? Is it 5 years? What are we looking at? And that maybe is something we should talk about. We're looking at 5 years, 10 years, because it does change the things. People are certainly modifying. I do see that class 2s are the most modified. Class 3s, it's funny to have so much discussion on class 3s. That a really, really small portion of the e-bike world is class 3. Most of the people that ride class 3s are urban commuters. But I think usage is maybe what we need to focus on. I do like how we've been talking about how do we get people to be nice. But let's just keep in mind that we have a big time window of these bikes are going to increase in efficiency and get more and more challenging to even be able to tell whether it is an e-bike or not. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. Go ahead, Dale.
For several years, I used drones as a business tool. I did a lot of photography with drones and things like that. And I started doing that at a time when drones first came on the scene. There was no regulation on it whatsoever. You could fly your drone anywhere you wanted. People didn't even know what the heck they were. There's some kind of buzzing bees out there or something, you know. And then there started to be complaints, and then there started to be legislation, and then there started to be rules associated with that, just like we're having here. And there are still people that fly their drones inappropriately. There's a lot of people that have got their license to fly their drone, myself included, to be able to legally fly your drone anywhere for business. But there's other people that have no clue what the rules are. A lot of people, they're not going to, everybody here is interested in what's going on. So everybody here has some kind of a stakeholder position on looking at what the rules are, how do we enforce them, how can we reasonably put something together here. But there's an awful lot of people that have no clue about what they are and how they apply to their actions today, what they're doing today out on the beach, out on the trails. And so, you know, we kind of go back to, I think we've mentioned a couple of times, you know, Simon talked about, you know, talking to people on the beach and kind of letting them know. So anyway, I think, again, we're back on, you know, how do we legislate that with people that don't know anything about it? And how do we make it also fair for people that are reasonable in running their e-bikes around? So anyway, that's my comment.
Thanks, Dale. Go ahead, Lieutenant Camp.
Just to add on to Dale's comment, I think that a way that you overcome some of that for the people that just don't know is you have your rules align with what's currently or mostly currently in practice statewide and in municipalities. So like on the behavior, the user behavior, virtually everyone knows that it's not okay to speed, or it's not okay to, you know, operate your vehicle in an unsafe manner. And so I think if you kind of stick with that, a common sense rule for operation, I think that'll go a long ways. Whereas like some people just aren't going to know about the type changes and things like that. And I understand where Dale's coming from on that.
Dale, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just was going to say, that's great. And somebody mentioned this earlier about kids that haven't taken a driver's test or anything like this. They're not really familiar with a lot of those rules, and they don't know how it's going to impact it. So it is, I think, an ongoing educational experience for people. So anyway.
Yes, so I like that the discussion is looking more towards the future and around implementation and the education of all of it. And I think where it ties back to what we're doing here today is looking at how we can create rules that are best appropriate for the situation we are in right now, and how do we communicate that effectively during implementation with education. So I really like what Elliot you said about the e-bikes not being in infancy but in adolescence. So it's still early days yet, and there's a lot more evolution to come. Unfortunately, our rulemaking is determined to the times we are experiencing now. And as that evolution happens, we can also update our rules, and then we can align them with any evolutions that we see with the state statutes as well. So I like the forward thinking, but I do want to kind of make sure that our conversation is around the impacts that we are seeing today and in the near future, so that we can help mitigate any issues. So with that said, we have about 7 minutes left, and there weren't any parking lot topics that I had really seen. Does anyone have anything that they want to throw out for a quick discussion? I really want to commend this group for being able to stay on topic, and thank you for bearing with all of my scrolling. So before we end here, let me just zoom back out on this. I will make sure that these rules get to you after this meeting with some of the changes. We didn't really get into the specifics of where we want to see things, where we don't want to see things, but we have these general ideas, and I really appreciate that because we can definitely condense that down into solid recommendations. But with all of you having your own perspectives and I'm sure more specific recommendations, feel free to capture that, and then you can also send those to me. It doesn't have to be in the group capacity. Where that's going to make the most impact, though, is when we do have them have the rules open for public comment and being able to have that in a public setting so that that can be recorded. And then moving forward at the next meeting, we will be discussing the Ocean Shores rules. That's another 2-hour meeting. We will dedicate 15 minutes of that meeting to this discussion. And if we have time after the Ocean Shores meetings, we can also go back and discuss some more of the general park rules as well. And then our last meeting in December will be based on the impact statements, and that is a 1-hour meeting. Does anyone have any questions on the process and timeline? No. Okay, Laurel said that we've already done this since we had rulemaking in 2018 and are adaptively managing now. Yes. So the example of the National Park Service and kind of the spirit of trying to determine where e-assisted bicycles can go and cannot go, and whether it's based on signs or not, maybe is not directed by a criteria based on trail width, but perhaps more on suitability based on behaviors and the current behaviors we're seeing and how to mitigate for that. So keep thinking about that a little. I want to thank all of you again for your time and for the discussions that we had today. If you have any questions before we meet again, you know how to get a hold of me. And have the last few minutes for any last minute burning items. Okay, well, in that case, we'll conclude early, but I'll hang on until 1 o'clock. So thank you.